Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are decoding what is honestly one of the most wild macroeconomic mysteries of our time. We're looking at a system that basically defies the laws of financial gravity. It's a paradox, all centered around the very currency that powers the entire global economy.
4.2 trillion. To really get a grip on today's economic mystery, we actually have to rewind exactly 1 century, back to 1924. By the end of that year, 4.2 trillion is exactly how many German marks it took to equal just one single US dollar. Crazy, right?
See, after World War I, the German government had to pay back $33 billion in reparations. And to manage that completely impossible debt, they just started printing money. And that, well, it unleashed an absolute economic horror story. A single loaf of bread ended up costing 2 billion marks. The currency became so utterly worthless that people in Germany were literally burning suitcases full of cash in their fireplaces, just because paper money was cheaper than buying actual firewood.
And look, this wasn't just a one-off thing in 1920s Germany. The historical pattern here is brutal, and it's practically unbreakable. Fast forward to Zimbabwe in the 2000s, printing money to escape a crisis led to 89.7 sextillion% inflation. That's an 89 with 20 zeros behind it. Or look at modern Venezuela hitting 1 million% inflation. History has basically established this absolute rule. Whenever a country prints massive amounts of money out of thin air to escape a crisis, devastating hyperinflation always follows. Every single time.
Section 1. The $36 trillion paradox. Define history. And this brings us right back to the present day, and the massive twist to this established rule.
$36 trillion. The United States national debt is currently sitting at over $36 trillion. Just to put that staggering number into perspective for a second, that is larger than the entire GDPs of India, China, Russia, the UK, and Japan all combined.
So, how did it get that high? Well, when the pandemic brought the global economy to a grinding halt, the United States didn't just borrow money. They created roughly $3 trillion in the single month of April 2020 alone. I mean, on paper, they seemingly did exactly what destroyed Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela.
Naturally, this has led to some pretty dire warnings from top financial institutions. The International Monetary Fund states it pretty plainly. American debt is a ticking time clock that will detonate unless we take serious, responsible action. The global economic stakes here, they literally could not be higher.
But here is the central mystery of our explainer today. This is the paradox we're unraveling. Why is there no hyperinflation in the US? Instead of collapsing under the weight of creating trillions of dollars out of thin air, how on earth is it possible that the US economy just keeps progressing?
Section 2. The money machine and how it works. To figure this out, let's dive straight into the engine room of the Federal Reserve and see exactly how the US avoids this massive detonation.
So the mechanics work in this very deliberate cycle. First, the Fed creates hundreds of billions of dollars completely digitally. They then use that digital money to buy bonds from commercial banks. Now that they're flushed with new reserves, these banks lower interest rates and start lending money to businesses and home buyers. This borrowed money then flows out into our everyday lives, hiring plumbers, electricians, builders, which gets the economic flywheel spinning. And ultimately, as demand rises, asset prices and government tax revenues go up too. They essentially use digital money to reduce their burden and keep the whole economy moving.
But let's anchor back to our core paradox here. Other countries have tried to run variations of this exact same flywheel, and it completely broke the economies of Turkey, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. So why doesn't this money machine cause hyperinflation in America?
Section 3. The global savior effect, the safety net. The answer actually lies in how the rest of the world reacts. Let's look at the first reason the U.S. completely breaks the historical rule. When the U.S. injects trillions into the economy, the value of the dollar naturally drops. But consider this dynamic for a second. When the dollar weakens, U.S. exports suddenly become much cheaper on the global market. Think about the avocados at your grocery store, or barrels of oil. If the dollar dips, an avocado priced in dollars is suddenly a lot cheaper for other countries to buy. And because it's cheaper, global demand for American exports shoots right back up.
And here is the absolute kicker. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. Essential global commodities, things like oil, gold, wheat, they are overwhelmingly settled in dollars. No matter what's happening globally, the world needs oil to fuel its economies, and you absolutely need dollars to buy that oil.
So when the dollar drops, the world is essentially forced to buy dollars back to get those cheaper commodities. That surging demand immediately fixes the dip in the dollar's value.
Section 4. The ultimate safe haven during crises. Now, that trade dynamic is incredibly powerful, but there's also a geopolitical phenomenon that acts as the final safety net for the U.S. economy.
Think back to some of the major shocks to the global system: the 2008 financial crash, the subsequent European debt crisis, or the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022. Whenever there's a massive disruption like these, it triggers a very specific, almost instinctual reaction from international investors. In times of chaos, global investors run back to the US dollar. It is a completely counterintuitive reality. Even when the US itself is the one triggering an economic dip, global fear sends billions, sometimes trillions, of investor capital flooding right back into US markets. They view the dollar as the safest asset on the planet, and by parking their money there during a crisis, they inadvertently restore the dollar's strength.
Section 5. The power of trust, the true asset. Which brings us right to the climax of this explainer. What is the actual, true, underlying asset holding this entire $36 trillion system together?
Well, just contrast these two currencies. If Venezuela prints money, nobody wants it. You could have literally trillions in Venezuelan currency, and no nation on earth is going to trade you their valuable oil for it. On the global stage, it's fundamentally worthless. But the US dollar? It is universally accepted.
This reveals the ultimate truth of the global economy. True power isn't the U.S. Army, and it isn't the innovation of Silicon Valley. It is trust. The United States gets away with a $36 trillion debt simply because the rest of the world universally trusts the dollar as the ultimate reliable backup. As long as oil is bought in dollars and investors see it as the safest haven out there, the system holds.
And all of this builds to a massive question for the 21st century. If the US dollar ever does falter, who will be the next superpower and which currency will the world trust next? Because right now there really isn't a clear backup. Sure, China has the economic scale, but they currently lack that vital, universal global trust that allows a country to just print its way out of trouble. It's a trillion-dollar mystery that is absolutely going to define the future of our global economy. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the numbers behind our world.